Cal Poly Humboldt was Humboldt State University, with a number of students from the anthropology department and staff. Yeah, and then these excavations, as they'll tell you, led to the nomination of the town to the National Register of Historic Places. So he was born and raised in Humboldt County. I can't remember exactly, fourth, fifth generation Humboldt County? Fifth. And graduated from Eureka High School, completed his BA in history at what was then HSU, and has worked as an archaeologist, I would say probably the archaeologist in the North Coast for more than 45 years. Has extensive knowledge in prehistory and history of Northern California, and has an MA in Cultural Resource Management, I believe from Sonoma State. And let me see if there's anything else we wanted to get to. And was formerly the director of the Cultural Resource Facility, the archaeological firm at Cal Poly Humboldt. Yeah, and then was also an educator for 28 years at Eureka High School, and also was a lecturer at Humboldt State University and College of the Redwoods, and former president of the Humboldt County Historical Society, just say that too. They're both very accomplished individuals. Before we start, just a couple quick housekeeping things. If you have your phone, let's silence those real quick, just in case, alarms, it just happens. Just wanted to let you know that the Humboldt County Historical Society should be launching their new calendar. Farmtastic is what we're calling it. And then, so that should be online and at the bookstore over there at the Barnum House shortly for your purchase. And then I'm also going to introduce real quick Carol Eli from the Historical Site Society of Arcata, who wanted just to plug something real quick.
Yes, currently at our house, do people know where it is? It's above Hellsport there in the corner on Union and 7th. Anyway, we have a display of all things Falk right now. We had the Holmes family, Dr. Holmes family gave us many things. His mother went to the mansion when it was for sale and bought tons and tons of things. Well, they're downsizing, the family is, so they gave it to us. So we have Noah's beautiful long black evening coat with his gold handle cane. We have his beaver hat. We have the mantle from the house. We have the chase line. We have many, many things from the Falk family. So come back by on Sundays. It's 2 to 4. We're open. Come and look at our things because we have a lot of things. And then the other thing that happened was we lost touch with Noah's family because he only had the one son. The other children died. And so Charles's family all moved away. And one of the great-great-granddaughters came by the museum one day. So she sent me lots of photos of the family and told me the history of the family of Noah's, which we didn't have in any of the books or anything because we lost track of them. So we have that, and then what else was I going to say? Oh, Peggy Falk, who is a descendant of Noah's brother, Jonas. She's going to do another talk for us at the museum on November 10th at 1 o'clock. And she did one before, and it was fabulous. She's got wonderful pictures, and anyway, it's a very interesting talk. You want to come. And the other thing that we're doing this Sunday, you probably all know Jerry Rohde. He's one of our top historians in Humboldt County. He is doing a talk for us on the 5 tribes of Indians that lived around Arcata. And his lectures are always fabulous because he has so many pictures. When he starts talking about something, he shows you maps, he shows you pictures so you can really follow it. So I think that'll be real interesting. So if you're interested in this, please come and talk to me because we need reservations because a lunch goes with it. And it's $35 for lunch and then the talk. And it's in the Plaza View Room in the Jacoby Storehouse. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Okay, well, I will let them get to the presentation.
Okay, is that working? Okay, good. All right. So this is also part of the BLM Headwaters Forest Reserve 25th anniversary of being a reserve. Since March 1999, it has been a reserve. So we've had a series all year, and this is one of the series. I just wanted to mention that. So we're celebrating that 25th anniversary. I'm also celebrating, and I've since left since March, actually. It was full circle for me. I started in May of 1999. And I was very shaped in my early career by the town of Falk and the Headwaters Forest Reserve, because I spent day after day hiking that trail. And so I was very seeped in the history there, and then the connections that I made along the way. And so those are the things that I'm going to talk about today in telling my story of Falk. So I'm not a maker of history, but I am a shaped, especially, and honored by the people that I met out there. Oh, and that was actually, I don't know if you, let me backspace it. So on my right, I'm in the middle. I have my, early on in my first year and first few years, actually, I had an analog battery-powered tape recorder that I would tape, and that's John Gates next to me, who wrote Falk's Claim. And then, of course, that's on the left is Jamie on my left. So it was really important. We were looking at a photo of the panoramic view that Christy Wrigley gave us of Falk. So around this time of year, every year it was sort of my ritual. I would go across the river and I would go to this house called the Olson House. And there was leaves from the maple trees coming in through the windows. And I could actually walk along the creaky floorboards. And it was always a little daunting because the floor was rotting. But it was the last Falk house. And nobody really knew it was there for about a year until we happened to just be gazing across the river and said, oh my gosh, the leaves had fallen. We could see a structure over there. So I went over there, and then every Halloween I would go over there and take photos and stuff of the maple leaves. So it was like very poignant, and it spoke a lot to me about the passage of time. So I don't know if you guys know, but the largest organism is mycelium. It's underneath the ground, and then mushrooms come out of that. So it's all through the Headwaters Forest Reserve. So we have all this organic material, but we also have these artifacts. So it would come up almost like mushrooms year after year of being there for 25 years. Wow, here is a windmill tail. Here is part of a rusted out bed. Here's an old shoe. And things would just kind of pop up just like mushrooms after a while, connecting me with that past year after year. But the deepest connections I made were with the people that lived there. And the people who lived it, that lived in that company town for 50 years. The Elk River Mill and Lumber Company, Falk, was in operation from 1884 to 1937. So finding in 1999 people that had lived there was very challenging. They were all... Actually, the people I interviewed were all children that grew up there in their 90s by then, so not a lot of people. If you looked at the Humboldt County census in 1900, sort of the heart of the Falk history, you'll see just kind of a slice of life. Of course, you have Native Americans. We had Native Americans in Falk. One teacher, her name was Maud Frosch. She was half Wiyot. You had the Irish, you had the Finnish, you had the Norwegian, the Denmark, Italian, Swiss Italian dairy farmers, which I'm going to talk about, Paul Mazuki, and then Portuguese for fishing, dairy farming, and then Canadians. A lot of those people have in common, they are from a logging history of their own origin and then pulled here for work because they had those skills that they could just jump and go on board and work. So everyone has their story, and you guys are all here, right? Because you like history, you like stories. How many of you, raise your hand, sat when you were a child and listened to your grandfather tell their stories, or your grandmother about your story? So it's personal. So that is how I felt about interviewing these people. I was very humbled. They would show me their photos and open their family books and share their stories. It was a very intimate experience. So right away, Jamie actually brought these two out to the Falk site. That's Paul Mizuki on the left and Wayne Miller on the right. They went to Jones Prairie School, which is just right by our Headwaters parking lot. They've known each other their whole lives. Paul was born in 08. Wayne was born in 1911. On the right hand of the woman is Wayne Miller. He grew up in Falk. And then on the very left is his sister Vandy, who also grew up in Falk. They had a very different experience than Paul Mizuki did, who lived just along Elk River Road, even though they lived very close. They were intimate with the company town. They had vegetable gardens. They relied on each other. They were very close with one another, all the neighbors. Wayne had bee boxes, vegetable gardens. They had hogs. So they were very self-reliant in what they did. And so they were very in touch with everything going on in Falk. And just like men of his age in the 1950s, he found himself in the logging industry. So not only was he part of the Falk history, he was part of the larger Humboldt County history that we see. Now, I was interested in hearing about his father, Jack Miller. How did Wayne Miller get to Falk? He didn't work in Falk, of course. He was just a child. So his father came out from Texas, and he went to Arizona and worked on Southern Pacific as a farrier. So he had this blacksmith experience. Saved his money and went to San Francisco in 1900. And he bought these really beautiful shoes. Wayne told me, like, the, sort of the topsider shoes. Just saved his money and got up to Eureka and was ready to come up here and work, and got off the train and sunk to his waist in mud. That was his introduction to Humboldt County. You have to be tough to live here, and he found that out pretty quickly. In 1904, he was hired as the blacksmith of Falk, so he had a tough job. He made all the tools. Everything was done by hand at Falk. All the tools were made. He didn't have a tool, he made it, and there was his help as well. So in 1921, he was making $120 a month, which is about $2,000 in our money. Doesn't seem like a lot of money, but all his rent and all his food was paid for. It was a company town, so all that money was just going right. He could have. I could live off $2,000 in cash. Paul Mizuki was probably the closest to me when I was doing these stories. He was born in 1908. He lived along Elk River. I interviewed him until 2006. So I met him when he was 91 in 1999. He became actually a very close family friend. And so I would sit in his house and I would listen to his stories, and he would tell me about working in Falk as a young man, what it was like to live out at Elk River. They moved to Elk River. His parents were Swiss Italian dairy farmers. They moved out there in 1918. They were immigrants from the Lake Como area of Italy. And he had a brother and a sister. And then he also went to work in the woods, and he was a rigging man. So he would wrap the cables around those logs and then run like hell, is what he said. And so he told me a really important story that kind of comes to fruition and has a lot of significance to today's history. When he was 13 years old in 1921, the mill pond broke and the dam broke, and there was a huge flood, and all those logs, all those redwood logs that they were going to mill at the mill, ended up on Paul Mizuki's property, just flash flood. And Noah Falk actually came down there. So there's the mill pond and the dam, and you can see all the logs behind there. Noah Falk came down there to Paul's, Italian, strong Swiss Italian mother, and said, "We want our logs back." And she said, "What about the little people below you? You're going to pay for the damages, and we're keeping the logs." So they ended up paying her $500 back then in 1921, which is about $8,000. And they kept the logs and sold those. I found a newspaper article dating all this when I was doing the research for this book. So that's Providence. You might have a story by somebody, but once you get a newspaper article, then it really cements it and seals the deal there. So that was very helpful in doing these kinds of stories, having an artifact or providence behind it. How tall is the dam? That's a good question. I would probably say, gosh, did we do any measurements on that? No, it was like about 200 feet. Yeah, about 200 feet. Not very high. It was a mill pond. So because of that money, $8,000, because they could sell the logs, their home, their previous home along the river, their barn was all damaged by that log jam that came through their property. They were able to afford and buy 1923 Mizuki House, which is still there along Elk River Road. So then it came all full circle. Save the Redwoods League bought the Mizuki property, which is 90 acres, and this house is included. And then the 90 acres is probably going to be going to the Bureau of Land Management, and it'll be part of the Headwaters Forest Reserve, and this residence will probably be sold. Now, the childhood experience, as I was talking, were very different from women. They generally stayed together. They did household chores, very domestic. They weren't playing in the woods. They weren't fishing. They weren't hunting. It wasn't a lot of fun. And Dorothy Fleckenstein, Corvey, her sons brought her out to Falk in 2008, and she shared stories with me about what it was like as a girl growing up in Falk. And when she was actually, her mom, Ida Fleming, was from Finland, and there she is pictured with her father, Bill Fleckenstein. He was the logging boss. So she actually came to the general store when she was about to have Dorothy and said, I need to get to the hospital now. There was no hospital out there. It was like really far. So they'd get her in a Model T and take her to the hospital, and that's how Dorothy was born. And then she lived her entire 18 years out there and went to San Francisco and never came back. It wasn't a good experience for her. You know, she grew up in the Depression. She was lonely. Her mother died when she was 4 years old. Her aunt raised her. She had one brother, so she was lonely. And she created this little dollhouse out of a kind of a stump like this. With a goose pen, but that's an old growth redwood, but it was sort of a goose pen that she would play with their dolls. And the nice thing about being there for so long and having that kind of story, and then things will happen and things breathe, history breathes as time goes by, and then a clue will happen where this doll head was found. And I asked the docent who found it, where did you find that doll head? And he said, I found it in a stump. And so because I had Dorothy's memory and her story, it all came together in one artifact. So story, artifact, physical manifestation. Boys in Falk had quite a different experience. When you were out at the Olson house doing the field school, I actually brought some of the items to Vernon Olson, who's seated there with his dog Spot, actually. He grew up in this house. His dad was the bookkeeper. He's the one that ran Dorothy Fleckenstein's mother to the hospital. And he was able to kind of give us a little verification about those artifacts as well. And he lived to be 101. So after everyone left in 1937, it became a ghost town, and Riggs Johnston was the lead forester for Sierra Pacific. His job was really to keep people out and from trespassing and looting the buildings, because they were there for 40 years just sitting there. So he befriended me and told me that whole side of the story. And he's since passed as well. He actually gave me the key that goes into that, beyond those yew trees, that's where the Webb house was. And so the door to their house that key fit in. And so his son gave me that key before they bulldozed it. And so that key is now at CRF at Cal Poly. Lolita's granddaughter came out, just happened to be walking by and visiting Humboldt County, and sees an interpretive panel, and she screams, "That's my grandmother!" And so, and she visited her grandmother out there and was looking for her house, but now it was a forest. And so she got in touch with me, and she would give me items of Lolita's, like this bracelet, and it was part of the necklace that Lolita had gifted her. And then she'd made a bracelet and gave that to me. So I was able to get these really wonderful connections that was a big highlight of my career. So putting all the pieces together, all these connections with photos, as you can see, that's 1907, 2020. You can see the bend in the row, and that stump is the same stump. You can see that this forest is regenerated immensely. That after even just since I was there, the trees have grown up so much that this town and all these memories and everything are now back to the forest floor. And then when I saw the salmon spawning and going up the river, it all made sense. It was this regenerative Headwaters message that there is really no death, it's change. It's transformation. And so these were the lessons that the people and the connections that gave me, but also the forest had its own way of transforming into a new community of people that go out there and can appreciate the history and look at the river and look at the salmon. And all the while there was this bustling town of Falk that was no longer there. So the Falk collection that I worked on, and then all these oral history projects and things, and all the items that were given to me throughout the years are all donated to the Humboldt Cultural Resource Foundation, where it is today. And so those are some of the Lolita's hat and Lolita's things, and then all the photos that were given to me. And then full circle, Falk was nominated in March as a National Register of Historic Places.
Is Lolita one of the Falk family?
Lolita Webb, yeah. So she was there as a young woman and just raised her family, but no relation to the town. Oh. Lolita, yeah. So you have a drone footage of Falk then and now. And here's all my photo credits. So that's it. I'll leave it for him.
Okay. Actually, well, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Julie. It's widely known that any 5-year-old child has better computer skills than me. So I'd like to take this moment to thank Jackie, Sadie, Jeanette, and Julie for helping me put together this collection of images from the thousands of images that are available at the Humboldt State Cultural Resource Facility. So this is the Headwaters Forest. It's 7,400 acres southeast, just a few miles southeast of Eureka, and it was acquired by BLM right about the time Julie got there. And so it's about total acres, 74, about 3,000 acres of old growth, 4,800 acres of previously logged forest. Here's the map of it showing the breakdown between the old growth remnants and the previously harvested land. So culture resource. Yeah, technology is not my thing. Thanks, Mark. Let me get a little closer. How's that? Is that a little better? Okay. It's a directional mic. So that's Headwaters Forest. So we got the contract from BLM to survey the 7,400 acres, and there wasn't much money. So I said, boy, there's not much money here. And Marlene told me, well, you can use students. And I go, yeah, I can use students, do a field school, but somebody's got to write this thing up. And, undergrads can't write the level of report that you're talking about for us producing. So anyway, we worked it out, and we started out there, and we started doing research. And here is a hand-drawn map that we found in the Humboldt State Archives showing Falk, the town of Falk when it was operational, and a lot of the major features. And here's another map of Falk, and this shows a couple of the areas that we actually excavated. We went out there with students and staff, and a lot of community volunteers were out there with us. We had there's a lot going on. So the yellow is actually the dance hall, and we did some excavations there. The red is the what we call the bachelor cabins, one of the small cabins that were unmarried men lived in. If you're married, they gave you a little more substantial accommodations. So the Cultural Resources Facility and hundreds of HSU students and community volunteers spent thousands of hours surveying, researching, mapping, and investigating these 7,400 acres, mainly from 2000 to 2012. So although we tested one Native American site, it was on the ridge top, the old military trail from Fort Humboldt. It was a Native American trail long before that, but it was a military trail too that went up along the ridge, and it ended up in the Yager Creek drainage. So that site, we tested it, and it was probably about 4,000 years BP at 82, but the vast majority of our work at Falk was focused on the historic lumber town of Falk and the surrounding infrastructure. We did mostly historic archaeology. Now, there are numerous written records about Falk, but historic archaeology can reveal many details of past lifeways and what the people were up to that is not covered by the written record. Humans don't necessarily tell the truth about what they are up to. But garbage, human garbage, doesn't lie. It doesn't. For instance, during Prohibition, you would think that people in Humboldt County weren't drinking a lot of booze. However, if you look at the archaeological record and oral history, they were drinking a boatload of booze, a lot of booze, booze bottles everywhere, just all over the place. And oral history, it's not in the written record so much, but if you talk to old timers, oh yeah, they talk all about it. Where you could go buy illegal booze. I could tell you from my grandfather where you could get a lot of illegal booze in Humboldt County in the 20s. So our work at Falk, all this historic archaeology we did, rounded out the written records considerably. So this is the report that we turned out for the initial survey when we went out there and surveyed all summer. It was a field school. And the people that produced the report were Bill Rich, Tom Johnson, Don Verwayen, and then Marlene, who was the BLM archaeologist at the time, Janet Eisnes, and Leslie Heald edited it and added greatly insights, suggestions, and made the final document, something that we can be proud of. And it's still available for anybody who wants to pretty slog through it, but it's there's a lot of stuff in there. Leslie Heald took all this huge amount of data, historic research, and drafted a National Register nomination for the Falk National Register District. It wasn't accepted at the time because we were told that they wanted to focus on the structures, but there weren't hardly any structures left. So the register kind of turned it away, and then we moved on to other stuff. Now, Cheryl Kinnear Ferris, the BLM archaeologist who just now retired, she took Leslie's work, added to it, and then turned it into a National Register district, but under criteria D, which is potential for research, potential for the archaeological deposit to tell us significant things about past lifeways. And that's exactly what's there now. There's not many structures, if any, but there's this an immense amount of stuff buried in the ground out there. So when we did this survey, this is a large area, and there's just, like I was saying, so much stuff out there. So we broke down the main town site into loci. And so each of those loci we mapped separately, so they had separate site maps, and then it was all combined, because there's just so much going on. It would have been too cluttered if we did it as one big thing. And then you can see some of the infrastructure, two of the camps. This was a Model A truck that was at the store, the company store, and it was, you can see it's still in the building. And I don't know what that, remember that picture was from, 40s or something like that, or 30s maybe? Long time ago. And then the other picture there shows the same truck after the building had collapsed. And this was probably taken in the 70s maybe, or 60s. John Gase's picture, yeah. And then so when we were out there in 2000, it was still there. It didn't look as good as that, but it was still there. So we mapped it in with the rest of the mapping we did. Okay, this is, you're probably familiar with this if you're familiar at all with Humboldt County history. These are two Dolbear steam donkeys. They were invented here by Dolbear, right here in Humboldt County, and they were used a lot in logging. Well, you had to have something, because these are enormous trees, as you can imagine. They still are. But this machine, using steam power and a spool, was able to winch these enormous logs around. And so you could log. You could winch them out of the woods. You could winch them onto trains. Train would take them to the mill, and then it could be winched around using steam donkeys. So when we're surveying, we surveyed, and this is a ways away from the town. This is an old landing, and we found this steam donkey, and there it is. It's all covered in ferns, kind of picturesque. But Julie had this wonderful relationship working with Paul Mizuki, and so we went and picked him up, and so we took him out here to this old landing, 4-wheel drived him up there, and he just like it's just like it was yesterday to him, even though it had been a long time. He was actually, there's Paul, he was actually up there. He was a spool tender on that donkey when the foreman came up from the mill and said, boys, we're shut down. It was in the mid-30s. The depression finally got him. So he said, boys, we're shut down. Go down to the office and collect your check. And they said, well, what do we do with all this equipment? I'll leave it there. We'll deal with it. So you saw how they dealt with it. It's still there. But it all came back to him. It's just like one of these moments of doing oral history. Julie's experienced this a lot, when just it's very serendipitous. It's really cool. Is it still there? As far as I know, it's a long way. I don't even think you can get there by 4-wheel drive anymore. Yeah, we could barely get there then, you know. So these are some more things that we found. This is that's the dance hall. That's the piano as it existed when we excavated it from the dance hall. And one of the students did some research, and we had a maker's mark on the piano. Is that in the collections, or it's still out there? I can't remember if we. Yeah, it was. You know, it's a freaking big piece of metal, so we left it there because it takes up a lot of space. So that's what the piano would have looked like when it was still in the dance hall. And the dance hall was, you know, there's a lot going on there. They had live music. It was a community center. There's a lot going on. I guess it got a little rowdy at times. Sometimes we found a lot of booze bottles out in back. You know, how'd that get there? We also found, like, there's a lot of patent medicine we found. One was for the treatment of venereal disease. You know, they don't talk about that in the written records. Anyway, so the dance hall, this was what we called the bachelor cabin. It was still standing at the time. It probably isn't now. You can see it's in pretty bad shape. So we actually went out there and excavated. Now, the field schools and field archaeology classes, which furnished a lot of the labor, the excavation, digging that happened. These field schools and field archaeological classes, this is a perfect educational opportunity. It's a perfect environment for an ideal educational experience. So this is Don Verwayen talking to a field class out there right before we started excavating. He's talking about a little about the history of Falk. It's a bachelor cabin. It's a small little cabin that a bachelor would have lived in. Would have been provided by the company. And then we excavated it, and then a student did a CAD program, and he put together this little snippet of how it was constructed. And that's what it looked like. And now you notice the skids on the bottom of this? So this was a cabin and this was very common in logging camps and logging communities. These cabins were portable. They weren't that big, and you could skid them around with a steam donkey, and you could load them up on a railroad car and railroad them down to the next logging camp. And so these little cabins moved around a lot. And this one was in the town. Well, it's just down from the town center. So it was probably brought there for some individual to live in. That's a plan view showing, see how small it is? It had a bench along one end. It had a bed, and it had a stove and some shelves, and that's about it. Because being a logger back at the turn of the century, it was hard work, and they had 12-hour days. And they ate at the cookhouse in the morning and at night, and they're out in the woods the rest of the time. So they didn't spend a lot of time inside this cabin. They mainly just slept. And but this is a good example of that. We did find some domestic refuse. Here's some white improved earthenware. Notice the maker's mark down on the right there. You could date crockery like this based on the maker's marks. We found some bottles, including Dr. Kilmer's swamp root. There's a lot of patent medicine out there. Lo and behold, Dr. Kilmer's swamp root was good for liver, kidney, and bladder tonics. I could use some of that right now, I guess. In fact, they might even still make it, according to the student. But look at all that. Look at all those materials. It's very. Some of this stuff like peppermint and aloe and valerian and sassafras, cinnamon, are all still used as supplements in various health food stores. I don't know. Anybody here know what skullcap is? That doesn't sound very healthy. Or balsam of Toulouse. I don't know. Anyway, a lot of patent medicines back there. I'll tell you a quick story. I was digging in Old Sacramento many years ago, and we kept finding these patent medicine bottles, and they're embossed Mrs. Brown's Mother's Little Helper. Okay, so we looked it up, right? So it was something that the mother, if the baby's colicky or teething or swallowing a lot, you just give a couple teaspoonfuls of this Mrs. Brown's Mother's Little Helper to this baby, it'd be out for a while. It was laudanum. It's just basically alcohol and opium. So it worked great for a while, but you know, God forbid you ran out of it, because then the baby'd get really cranky. You know, so yeah. So there's a lot of patent medicine back in those days. Yeah, a lot of yeah. Good thing you don't make it anymore, right? Well, yeah. So loggers and food go way back. Industrial workers, their relationship with food was very important. Good food was extremely important to loggers. Loggers were not that well paid. They were not as well paid as, like, you know, some train workers or other industrial trades you can think of, skilled industrial workers. But they were given room and board, and the board part, the food, was really important to them. In fact, if there's incidences in the written record where a whole logging camp would essentially quit because the food was bad, and the company wouldn't do anything about it, and so they just moved to some other camp where they get fed better. Well, apparently, Noah Falk was known for treating workers pretty well. Julie told you a story about how he came to Paul's Wayne's family and gave him money and let him keep the logs. But he was known for treating his workers pretty good, and having a good board, having good food at the cook camps. In fact, there's a little blurb. Of course, this is put out by the Falk Company, but it said, you can read it. Best food is furnished, and visitors have said it's better food than many first-class hotels. But they ate very well. And this is, so we actually excavated one of the cook camps. This is the upper cook camp. And you notice the railroad tracks kind of going through there, and the workers' cabins up above, and then the cook camp, the cookhouse was there looking down, notice the slope down into South Fork, the Elk River. And we called it Maggie's Camp, because that's Maggie, that prominent-looking woman there in the middle. That was Maggie. And this is some of her helpers, and maybe some of her family. So we called it Maggie's Camp. And there's that cook camp in relationship to the town of Falk, and it was a bit of a slog. I mean, it was, we were hiking in there, so we had to hike all the equipment, the screens, and everything, and it took a while to get into some of these places. That's what it looks like when we were there. It's grown up even more now. You can still see some structural remains. This is the map that was made. You can see where the collapsed structural elements were, and you can see the topographic lines going down into the river. And we put some units right along the bottom of the slope, because they didn't have any garbage collection back then. All this food waste and broken crockery and everything's produced by this cookhouse. They just chucked it over the edge, down into the down towards the river. There's a bit of structural remnants, and this is laying out one of the units. You can see the boiler for the hot water heaters down there in a big old wash basin, and so you can see the slope. So and this is when you clear off the duff, this is the beginning of one of the units that we excavated, and look at all the broken crockery and the bone, big a lot of dietary bone. This is the unit when it's down to the bottom. You can see there's a little piece of brick down there, and you can see the layer of debris from the cookhouse all along a large area. There's another unit. You see all the bone? See all the cow bone there? I mean, just like they went through a lot of cows. They like two cows a week were eaten by the workers, and that's not counting the pork and whatever else that they had. And it was usually provided by the local ranches. In fact, the Wrigley's provided beef for them for a while, apparently. There's the bottom of one of the units showing. You can just see the amount of historic artifacts that we recovered from these excavations. This is called white improved earthenware. It's very common. Some of you might have some of them in your homes. Very common in Humboldt County and all over the West. The cup there is a handleless cup that was really, really common in logging camps all over the Northwest. And we found numerous, there was enough to equip a restaurant. The amount of unbroken ceramic cups that when they closed the place down, they didn't pack it back. It's still out there. With maker's marks, this is the kind of stuff archaeologists do sometimes. You do charts and graphs and all that kind of stuff to kind of visually illustrate, in this case, the 4 types of china that were the most common out there at the cook camp. And the thing about maker's marks, and there's maker's marks there at the bottom, they have dates. They have when the ceramic factory was in operation. So here you have KT and K china, 1872, 1931. And then the Royal Ironstone, that's 1883 to 1913. They weren't in operation very long. So if you find a maker's mark from that company, you know that that piece of crockery in your site dated from that, was deposited probably during that time period. And so if you have all these different, many pieces of crockery with many maker's marks like this, you can get a rough idea, a rough date of when the site was occupied, even if you don't have written records, which we have in Maggie's camp. But you could, that's done a lot in archaeology. Lots and lots of faunal remains. You see the butchering marks there on the bone. A lot of the bone had butchering marks, saw butchering, and cleaver marks. Lots of glass bottles, and sure enough, there's beer out there. Lots of beer. Medicine, condiments. This was another Ayers cherry pectoral. It's a cough syrup, and we found actually more than one of these. This is an example of domestic artifacts that we found. There's a big enamel wash basin. There's a condiment bottle stopper. Can you read that? It says Liam Perham. You guys have any Worcestershire sauce in your grill? I have some. The same company, still going. They made the bottles quite a bit differently back then, but it's a company that's still, people like Worcestershire sauce, and it's still around. An ink bottle, an old iron. These are the irons you put on a stove and heat it up, and then you'd iron with that. They didn't have steam irons back then. And this is an old clock. In fact, it might even have been Maggie's clock. I took it to a watch repair shop to see, but they said it needed more than a battery, so I didn't fix it up like I was hoping to. These are this is cosmetic cream and resinol. When you find artifacts like this, you know that women were there. And you saw a picture of Maggie and her helpers and maybe some of her family. Just like if you find toys, you know that children were there. And if you find certain types of artifacts, it's an ethnic group that probably deposited that type of artifact in the site. You don't find a lot of loggers putting on face cream. Not back then. Anyway, this is another excavation that we did out there. This was the engine house. This is where they worked on the steam locomotives as part of the logging train system. And that's the building as it was when we got there. The front was in pretty good shape. And what they did was they salvaged a lot of it, and they made it into an interpretive center. They moved it from where it was, and they salvaged the walls that were still intact, and it was redwood, so some of it was in pretty good shape, and they moved it. Bill Rich directed the test excavations here for CRF and wrote a master's thesis on the excavations at the train barn, which are available if you're interested. After CRF's investigation there, let me go into the investigation a little bit more. So here's the site map. It shows where the train barn was in relationship to the other features in that area. So you have, you have the railroad tracks, you have the road, you have the river. And then here are research questions. When you're doing excavations, you should have research questions. I mean, what are you hoping to find? What you excavate, what kind of questions about past human lifeways might you find from this excavating this particular archaeological deposit? So here's some of the questions that were from this excavation, and some of them were answered. Is there evidence that alcohol was being consumed at a working place? Well, yeah, so there was. But not all the questions were answered completely, but these are the questions that were there, some of the questions going into the excavation. Here's a plan view of the engine house. The southeast room was actually a blacksmith shop. The northeast room was perhaps a work break room or something like that. So this is where the southeast room had collapsed. So this is what it looked like when we first went there. And once we got the duff off, you can see the collapsed wall and the roof. This is the plan view of the engine house showing, the joists and everything as they were recorded after the excavation was done. This is some of the units being laid out. You can see the forge. That's the blacksmith's forge. In fact, Wayne Miller's father might even worked at this. There's a pretty good chance. So it's in pretty good. And this is Don excavating the forge. There's a lot of ash, a lot of charcoal, as you can imagine. There was coal there and clinker, but it was an industrial forge. Basically used to repair locomotives was the main function. So here's an artifact analysis. Our archaeologists especially when you have this much stuff dug up, you divide it into categories and types. So here's the activities. Bullet casing was found. Domestic, industrial, personal, structural, and modern materials don't do much with like Coke bottles from, or beer cans from 10 years ago. But this is how you organize things to organize your analysis. Here's a clear glass tube. They used to have these, you can still see them in modern steam engines. They have these clear glass where you could monitor the water levels. And steam engines, if they're not monitored correctly, they'll blow up on you. There's been a lot of accidents back in the 17th or 16th, not 16th, that's too far, 18th, and especially in the 19th century where steamboats blew up and killed a lot of people. A lot of pipes. A lot of steam engines have a lot of pipes. Condensers, they have condensing pipes, they have water pipes, steam pipes. Found a lot. Bill contacted the Levi Strauss historian at the Levi Strauss Museum because found a lot of Levi Strauss buttons and rivets. Why? Because they're really heavy duty. Levi's were invented right here in California. In the gold rush, they were durable, they still are. And so a lot of these engineers and people working out there were wearing Levi's. This is the site after they removed the salvageable walls and stuff. This is what it looks like. And that's the Engine House Interpretive Center. If you go out to Falk, you can go through there. Industrial site, here's, what do you think this is part of? This is part of the mill. Those are band saws. And they just left them. There's just, I don't know, they might have cleaned up some of that, but a lot of that stuff most of that stuff is still there. So I'll end with some crew pictures and stuff. Here's some pictures of the hundreds of students and volunteers, community volunteers and staff who participated in the work well over a decade, still going on sometimes. And BLM funded some of this. Some of it was just field schools, field trips. We had permission to go out there, so we do an archaeological methods course, and we just it's not that far. We just take a van, and go out there and take students out there and walk them out there and do some historic archaeology. The field work could be a little rugged. This is, we're excavating on the other side of the river, and, we wouldn't try to get the students across if it was up to their nose, but if it was up to their knees or thighs, we'd cross. One good thing about Humboldt State, or Cal Poly now, I still say so, Humboldt State, is that in all the years we've done archaeological field schools and field trips, we haven't lost a student yet. Come close, but it's not yet. But crossing the river, wading, it's it was a little rugged. So there is we're laying out a unit. You notice that handsome young man there taking notes. There, it's Mark. Yeah, he was out there quite a bit, and and you see the young woman with her face turned looking at the camera. Where'd she go? Did she sneak out? Where's Alex at? Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, that's Alex at one of the field trips. Yeah. And then taking notes, screening, laying out units, and then analyzing and producing reports is what archaeology is all about. And so this is the last picture. There's a bunch of the crew and students and volunteers out there. So I just like to thank all the community volunteers, all the personnel from CRF, and certainly all the hundreds of students that participated in this field work at Falk over the last decades. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, let's see. Hello? One more time? Okay. So we're pretty much at time, but I'm sure if there are just one or two questions, we can take those real quick. I'll pass the microphone, and then I'm sure Jamie and Julie would be happy to stay for a little bit and answer any questions as well that you guys might have. So if anybody has a quick question, one or two, yeah, go ahead.
When was the mill running? When did it start? When was it started and end?
1884, 1937. So it actually ran a pretty solid run from 1884 to 1930, and then it shut down for 6 years until they could upgrade. They were trying to upgrade. It was never had electricity or modern. They still ran steam out there, and so they applied for $1 million grant or $1 million loan, which is like $230 million in our money, and got tractors and upgraded some of the equipment and everything, but it wasn't enough to keep it going sustainably. So they shut it down for a year later in 1937.
Who was their market? Where did they send the redwood to?
Oh, they sent it all over. I have letters from them selling to Tokyo, Japan, just all over our country.
So they shipped it out of Humboldt
Yeah.
Valley.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the redwood was, and especially during the 1906 earthquake, it all rebuilt San Francisco. He was doing really well after that earthquake. Yeah.
Okay, if we have one more question, we'll do that. Otherwise, okay.
Is there any other ongoing archaeological projects in Humboldt County and also with Falk?
Falk, maybe not so much. Mark is co-director of the Cultural Resource Facility now, and he could help you. Yeah, there's a lot of archaeology going on actually right now because the way that the laws are in CEQA and NEPA, if you're going to be doing a project, if you're going to be disturbing, like building a road, a shopping center, the permitting agency is supposed to assure that the ground disturbing activities associated with that project aren't going to be destroying significant, and that's the key word, significant cultural resources. So yeah, there's a lot. We're doing the wind farm right now, the proposed wind farm. There's a lot. There's two WIAT villages there on the footprint of where the wind farm's going. So there's.
This is so rich to get all this information from Falk. I just wonder if there's other places, in Humboldt.
Yeah, and Humboldt, I think, still has volunteers on some projects. I mean, basically there's liability involved. In fact, some of the stuff we did back then, we probably wouldn't, because of liability, Humboldt State probably wouldn't let us do it anymore. Because, you're crossing a swollen river with a bunch of students, swirling water up to their waist, But we had a rope and we had people standing in the middle, so, yeah. Yeah, we gave them life vests, so it was all good, yeah.
We all survived as we went out there.
Everybody, we haven't lost one yet.
Yeah, I would say the university right now, we mostly do a lot of post-fire or pre-fire work. So we've been a lot of the Dixie Fire, August Complex, Smith River Complex. We're all over the place. And we have about like 20 or a little bit more than 20 paid interns right now through our contracts and stuff like that, so that we do. So a lot of stuff, but we're all over the place. So.
We actually have one of our volunteers here, Rusty.
Where's Rusty?
And he's back there, but he is
perfect.
an archaeological steward. So he takes photos out there and he writes reports and he watches certain sites like the Olson site, right? And certain sites like the where the yew trees are. And so he kind of watches it over time and really takes notes and records all that. So he's really important. He just had a talk, about a month ago. Yeah. So.
And that's really important, having stewards, people that watch out for significant sites, because unfortunately, human nature, what it is, there's a lot of people that loot sites to make money for themselves. And the public loses all the knowledge from a looted site. Everything that's taken and sold on the black market and everything is, any knowledge that can be gained from the artifacts that were stolen is lost to the public. Yeah.
Have you done any research on any of the other company towns, like Cornell, for instance? That was a lovely town.
Susie Van Kirk, you might know the name. She was wonderful.
Did she do some with Cornell?
She and I did. Yeah, it was her, but it was a contract through us, and then she recorded that because they were taking some of the equipment and moving it, and we put Samoa on the National Register. Scotia is on the National Register, I believe. Any others? I can't remember. You did work on company towns. Did I cover it?
Yeah.
All of them?
Yeah, I think that you did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't think of any other ones.
Yeah, and the thing about Humboldt County, Falk, the buildings aren't there anymore, but Samoa, Scotia, there's still some, Cornell, there's still buildings standing from that.
Are there still things out of Cornell?
There's not been any historic archaeology. We were basically doing architectural history. We were recording the building as it is today, and then evaluating it for National Register eligibility, or Susie was. Yeah. And then Leslie, who did a lot of the early work on Falk, got this all together, and then Cheryl, BLM archaeologist that just retired, she took that work and then made it to fit what the register wanted, and then they did put it on the National Register.
Well, the kind of difference too is that Falk is owned by the government,
Right.
where Cornell is still owned by Green Diamond and.
And Scotia's owned by
That makes
a
a
private
difference
group,
too,
yeah,
doesn't it?
owned by Danco, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, perfect. Well, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for those that are watching back home. And yeah, thank you to Jamie and Julie also for doing the talk.